if we pay attention, we're surrounded by religious messaging. I mean, the United States itself is deeply rooted in a certain type of Christianity. And that type of Christianity goes deep into the bones of each of us, all around us. Think about the power of Christmas and Easter in American civic life. Just for example, the wars about Merry Christmas at Christmas time, or whether the Easter Bunny belongs in local schools. Think about conversations that people have and how common Christianese is all around us. So, this faith of ours is deep in us in some ways. And even if you don't believe necessarily, there's still some cultural messaging that's part of who you are in this very moment. So, for the last few weeks, we've been talking together about what it looks like to deconstruct so that we can reconstruct. In other words, leaving behind patterns of Christianities that are shameful, that are fundamentalist, that are literalist, leaving behind Christianities that are authoritarian, and instead embracing a kind of Christianity that is open and inclusive, that's deeply thoughtful, that encourages all sorts of ways of thinking and being, and that really lean on what is it that you uniquely believe and think about the world, knowing that in that way, as you bring your best self to this religious life of ours, our life together, that then we too together are stronger and better and more loving, more kind, more compassionate. The question then becomes, how do we do that movement in us when a lot of the messaging is so deep within us? In today's story, and there's a lot in this story, but in this segment that we have today, this woman that Jesus encounters is used to a certain way of thinking about God, about the world, about worship. In fact, she remembers in her own memory something about one who is coming that's going to kind of make all things good again. And that one who is coming is actually sitting right before her. And so Jesus kind of calls her into a new way of thinking about who she is, about her religious tradition, and about the transformation needed in her to begin to see something different from the religious upbringing that she had. And so I'm wondering today, what do you need? What's that Jesus moment that you need so that then you too can be shaken into a new way? In the church of my upbringing, we would call that conversion, right? A change of heart and life. Or we've talked together about metanoia, that beautiful Greek word that means a turning around, right? A change, a transformation. And that certainly is key to this. But if we don't pay attention, we might miss that moment, that stirring of the Spirit in you that begins to shift you from a certain way of thinking into a new way of thinking, from a certain way of being in the world to a different way of being in the world. And so it could be that you begin to pay attention to that stirring. And I think so often, I know in my own life, what began that reconstruction was a stirring in my soul over 25 years ago now, that something in that religious tradition of my upbringing, in that Christianity, was no longer settling well within me. There was an uncomfortableness. There was an angst. There were actually a lot of questions that began to emerge in me. And then when I went to that tradition, they didn't allow me to ask the questions. They didn't help me, expand my imagination. They went back to what the church taught, right? They said, well, this is what we believe. And a part of the commitment was a certain commitment to not ask too many questions, because if you ask too many questions, then you might go astray, right? So there was this protective, paternalistic fear that was brought about in front of me as I asked these questions. And so this angst and this questioning was that turning, that slight turning that began to invite me into an opportunity. Now, in my case, that led me to walk what I thought would be a walking away from the faith. When in reality, now looking back on it, that period of my life where I was exploring atheism and secularism and a certain humanistic spirituality, and I was reading deeply in those topics, that actually, now looking back, I recognize that was part of the journey. So sometimes we actually have to turn around completely and walk away in order for us to begin to find our way again. And that can be quite disorienting, right? This woman in today's story, all of a sudden is facing Jesus, doesn't recognize him as this Christ that she'd been taught would come one day. But now she's having to kind of think about this, and it's literally like you can almost see her wheels turning in the story today. She said, "Well, but my ancestors were taught something, and now you're telling me something else." And so Jesus and her have this conversation together, this back and forth. Jesus kind of in some ways challenging her to think differently, to be different. So sometimes we walk away completely. And I'm here to tell you, it's okay to walk away completely. It's okay to have those doubts. It's okay to explore many other religious options. It's okay to begin to find God at work in different ways, or not find God at all. Are you going on this journey? That's the question. Are you allowing yourself to go on this journey? So that angst is the first kind of clue, and then often the next thing is a certain rejection of Christianity writ large. But then there's a moment. Sometimes something happens along the way. In my case, I think was a hunger within me. Some of what I was reading was awesome, and I still actually, some of what I learned in those years around a secular spirituality still deeply informs who I am. But in the end, what happened in me was a certain hunger, a hunger for community, in the way that the church can create it, a hunger for certain patterns, rituals of life together. A hunger for the story of Jesus in a different way. I had an encounter with Jesus, and that encounter, I couldn't explain it through reason, right? So some of these things I was reading had me lean on reason deeply, but then I couldn't explain this encounter I had with Jesus. And so Jesus, in some real ways, found me. Maybe Jesus has found you, and you feel that tug in your heart, deep in your soul. You feel that tug. Like this woman in today's story, she found someone who told her everything she had ever done. Someone that knew her and still engaged her and loved her and freed her. So maybe you are feeling that tug today, deep in your soul. Oh, there's still lots of questions, aren't there? There's still so many things that are not clear. There's still things that need to be figured out. So now I'm inviting you to then now continue. Take the next step. Take the next step in your journey and keep on walking. Jesus sees you, calls your name. The transformation has already begun. And here's the reality. You're here today, but transformation hasn't stopped. The walk with Jesus is a lifetime of a journey. So hey, you're being transformed, and you will be transformed. So are you being transformed into a more loving, compassionate, kind person? Are you being transformed away from that hyper-individualism where you think you can do it all by yourselves into a community? Are you being transformed into service to the world? That's the question. Because this journey of reconstruction is a lifetime journey. Jesus invites us into it, companions us through it, and gives us a community called the church to come alongside us, each of us in our own place in the journey. See, that's reconstruction. That's conversion. That's new life. Actually, that's salvation at its very, very best. Thanks be to God. Amen.